Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I found in my travels. Today, I don't want to talk about a specific book, but rather I want to do the usual wrap-up for 2025. We've finished another year for me on this earth, another year for you on this earth, unless you're watching from, a distant galaxy sometime in the future, and you don't measure things in years, but some other system of measurement. Good job for you, and thank you for watching this video. I know you have countless videos to choose from in, being from a different galaxy, and I'm glad you picked this specific one, talking about this specific year for whatever reason. We've come to another year. I always like to talk about 10 of my favorite books, as well as some honorable and dishonorable mentions, just because it's always fun to catalog things like that, and talk about books that I enjoyed. I do think that this year was pretty front heavy. In the first part of the year, first 6 months, there were a lot of really good books. In the second half, there were some pretty high quality books, but I don't feel there were as many as usual, especially compared to like previous years where there were some really quality classics at the end of like November and December that I had to choose from as well. But that's not to say, that this year was a wash or anything like that. I just feel like, as per usual, like there's always a book in January or February by which I measure the rest of the year. One year it was War and Peace, another it was Lolita. This year it seems to be Pride and Prejudice or something like that. Or maybe even Sphere by Michael Crichton. But, a number of really solid books that I've come across and that I felt myself judging by Pride and Prejudice's standards. And I wonder what that book is going to be in 2026. So it's both a blessing and a curse, because I'm always like, oh yeah, that book was really great, but also you can't compare some books to like Pride and Prejudice all the time, especially if they're different genres and whatnot. But that's another problem entirely, I think. I will point out there are about 126 total books that I read in this year. I did have like more books in previous years, but there were fewer than normal, which 125 is still a good deal of books to read, much more than the usual person I think reads. But I do think there was probably less because this was a pretty bad year, politically speaking, because there was always something that I was worried about as it pertains to the growing sense of fascism and awful people in power. And so as I was trying to read, my mind kept drifting to that, and I didn't get through as many books as a result of that. But that's not a way to really go about things in the world. You shouldn't let the fascist oppressors, the awful people who try to run the world, the rich and powerful, prevent you from enjoying art, or prevent you from really going about your normal day. You should definitely focus on them and fight them whenever possible, but you shouldn't let them sort of deprive you of the good things that exist in the world. And that's something I'm going to have to remember as we go forward in this very weird and awful time that we live in, of just trying to enjoy art while not letting the bad things of the world kind of suck me down. And I'm sure that's something that other people have kind of been dealing with as well. If you have, let me know in the comments. And if you haven't been dealing with that, what country are you living in and how can I get there? Although, judging by what's going on in the world, there's probably a few countries that aren't dealing with some sort of terrible leadership, terrible shifts in power and whatnot. But that's probably not what this video is supposed to be about. But as always, fascism sucks, Nazi punks fuck off, and power to the people, and may socialism or communism or whatever see its true day of helping the world. Again, if you have a problem with anything I just said there, don't even bother to comment. Just go comment on someone else's video. I don't want to hear it. Yeah, that's pretty much what's been going on. Now, before I move into the top 10, I would like to talk about some dishonorable mentions of what I've been reading that have been both good and also really bad that couldn't make the list but might have made it any other year. One is Jerry's Crab Shack, 1 star, a short story about a man sort of giving a review to a restaurant where he had a bad time. And I really like the short story because it highlights more than just that bad time, kind of like talking about like his marriage and where it once was and where it is now. And it's a really good short story that I thought at the beginning of the year was probably going to end up on my year-end list, but other things kind of took that spot. I also have Walk Two Moons by Sharon Creech. Really solid young adult fiction right there. Again, probably when it would have made the list any other year, but again, I've encountered a number of really top contenders, but I do particularly like the story about like focusing on a friend of the main character and sort of telling a story about, that friend long after something has really happened, and trying to understand that friend's narratives and things like that. It's really good. I definitely think it's one of the young adult stories that are really pretty good out there. So that was one of the the Newbery honorees or something like that. I don't know if it won or if it was just an honoree, but it was definitely something that I think deserved a lot of attention when it comes to giving awards to young adult fiction. And then there was also Spear by Michael Crichton, pretty solid read for science fiction in particular. Gender Queer by Maya Kobabe, which I thought was a pretty solid, and it probably would have made the list any other year, but there was just so much that kind of edged it out and whatnot. But I do think it's a very important graphic novel, especially very important for young people who are trying to, discover themselves in the world, especially with a lot of confusion that comes with adolescence. And there's a lot of importance in reading it because people are trying to ban it, and it's always important to ask, why are people trying to ban such books? It's because it dares to say that your children are more than what you want them to be. They have a mind of their own, and you can try to control them, but they might turn out to be different than what you were hoping for. So definitely go out and seek Gender Queer. It's an important read. Into the Wild by John Krakauer, about a man's fatal journey into the Alaskan wilderness. Pretty solid read. Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, which I thought was a very beautiful story. Definitely thematically similar to some of the other things that I talked about on this channel. And again, like it might have made the list, and I was really torn between this or another one, but I ended up going with the other one. But it's still very important and worth your attention. And then The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa, which I thought was a really great book. It was one of the last things I read this year. I do think the weakest part of it is probably the ending. A really good ending, but like I felt like it could have done better, especially with the sort of narrative, the characters and the setup. Like there could have been more life to all of those things. And although it was a really good read, I felt those were kind of sort of causing it to bringing it down a little bit in my eyes. So those were definitely some honorary mentions that are still worth pursuing. And then the dishonorable mentions, there aren't as many as there are usually, but there's The Last Vampire on Earth, which is based on a movie. I read that as sort of like a challenge from a friend. It's not very good. Don't seek it out. And then The Burial of the Guns by some author, I can't remember their name, Thomas Mann or something like that. It's basically a short story about a group of Confederate soldiers who go off and bury their guns. And it's really bad because, one, it sort of idolizes Confederate soldiers, but also it propagates the myth of the noble cause of the Confederacy, that they weren't fighting for slavery, they were fighting for states' rights, they were fighting for their way of life, which is not true. The South was fighting to preserve slavery. The South wanted slaves. The South wanted to own black people. The South wanted to continue that system, and the North was like, we probably shouldn't continue that. Although the North really wasn't like that. It was more like, we should probably get rid of this eventually. And then Abraham Lincoln got elected, and people were like, well, he's going to ban slavery, so we might as well, go to war. And there was no real evidence that Lincoln was going to, ban slavery. It's just, if anything, given the list of presidents who came before Lincoln, he would have probably done something mediocre just as much as they did. But, that's beside the point. The point is, The Burial of the Guns is a bad short story. It promotes a racist message, and it idolizes a bunch of traitors and other such people. And you should do your best to ignore it and scorn it whenever possible. But anyways, now we can move on to the 10 books that I have written down as the 10 best books that I read this year. Now, they don't have to be written in this year. I don't believe in doing that, especially because I don't read a lot of current books, just because there's a whole lot of books from previous years that I just haven't gotten to, and I'll always try to read something new, whether by accident or by seeking it out at a friend's recommendation. But there are my list is really made up of 10 books that I really enjoyed in a given year. So if you take anything from this list, let it be that these are 10 books that you should definitely seek out if you haven't already read them. And so without further ado, let's do that. I will start with, the first book and move on from there. All right, so number book on my top 10 list, the first book is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This is like one of the first books that I read in the year. Again, as I mentioned before, it guided a lot of my understanding of other books and throughout the year, especially my relation to whether I liked them like whether I was going to get another pretty high quality book. By the end of the year. I will say, very hard to really get into Pride and Prejudice. There's a lot of, rich people problems going on in the story. But I think at its heart, the romance between Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy is one of the best written romances in fiction. I love their sort of stubbornness getting in the way of the relationship and falling victim to rumor and, hearsay being a problem. And then the big confrontation that happens at the center of the story, the middle of the story, where like Elizabeth says, I don't like you, Mr. Darcy, and here's why. Here's what I heard about you. And Mr. Darcy's like, why are you listening to what other people have said? That's not true at all. I thought I liked you. I thought I loved you, but you're kind of a jerk. And it makes Elizabeth feel really rotten. And they spend the rest of the story trying to get to a point where they can be together again, because Elizabeth knows that she did him wrong. And it's just really well written. I think Jane Austen does a great job of sort of building up this romance in a very reasonable way that, stands the test of time. Like, even though, it's 200 years later, like, it still feels like something that you could see in this day and age. So, definitely a solid book that I think is worth pursuing there. Number 2 on this list is If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin. Very solid book about, two people who are in love, Tish and Fawny, two black individuals, and Fawny is accused of raping a woman, even though there's no real proof, but the justice system is against people of color in the United States and has been historically, and so it's not looking good for him getting out of prison. It's like James Baldwin does a really good job of, telling that story of oppression, the story of class in New York City, but also at the same time building up this beautiful romance, because it is kind of a romance story. It's many different things, but it's also a story of love between two people, and you get to see that romance develop and build and be something really special, and it breaks your heart that the system is really not good at allowing such a romance to continue, because black men have been oppressed in this world. I've heard a lot of good things about James Baldwin in terms of his social commentary, but the fiction that he writes is exceptional as well. So definitely something that is worth pursuing. I also read The Kite Runner. This is number 3 by Khaled Hosseini, a story about two friends from different social classes in Afghanistan whose friendship is torn apart by a horrific event that happens to one of them, and then is further kind of pulled apart by the Russian intervention in Afghanistan, the war with the Russians there, and the rise of the Taliban in the 90s and 2000s. It's very interesting because the story is driven by guilt. The main character witnesses their friend get sexually assaulted, does nothing to really intervene, and he's driven by that guilt throughout the story. And so when he has an opportunity to save that friend's child from prison, or not prison, but a life of torment in an orphanage or something like that, he tries his best to sort of intervene and rescue that child by going back to Afghanistan. Of course, you also have the Taliban in the story, and it's not simply portraying Afghanistan as this bad place. It's showing how the Taliban can rise, how a hate group essentially can impose their religious beliefs upon an entire populace, and how people can really, not speak up about that, because there's definitely a lot of non-Taliban Afghanis in Afghanistan, and you would think, oh, well, surely they could rise up, but they don't, and there's a very specific reason, because if you speak out, you're going to get smacked down, and other people might agree with you, but they might not speak out as well, so who's going to be the first person to do that? There's a lot of very interesting aspects of that in the Kite Runner, as well as how the main character chooses to confront their guilt and try to serve in a very heroic way, and whether that does some good ultimately. This book has been very well celebrated. Also, a few issues with being banned and whatnot, and some anti-Muslim sentiment that might pop up in there or something like that. But mostly, I think it's a really solid read. One that was probably very important and needed to exist in the the mid 2000s, during a time when anti-Muslim sentiment in America was on the rise and still continues to this day. But a story like The Kite Runner serves as a good way to kind of challenge that, and also get us to reflect more in ourselves, I think. So definitely, that's why it's on number 3 on my list here. Number 4 was the Congo by Michael Crichton. It was either between this or Sphere by Michael Crichton, but I decided to only put one of his books on the list. And it's a typical Michael Crichton book, very science focused, focusing on a lot of interesting ideas, especially for their time, because he's talking about data science as well as computer science, especially with chips and development of technology, and its relationship to neocolonialism in Africa. I really think it's fascinating how Michael Crichton was writing about this in the 1980s, because it was happening then, but it's happening a lot more now, especially in the Congo and other places in Africa where people are trying to get these precious metals that will allow them to further develop computer technology, AI technology, and all of that. And Michael Crichton's not really focusing on the social aspect of that, but a lot of his works, while not intentionally anti-capitalist, end up coming off that way, especially because, people are using science for bad purposes. You always see characters end up suffering because of their misuse of science or something like that. You saw that a little bit in Sphere, but you also see it in Congo. And Michael Crichton's just a really great writer. He does have a tendency to be ooh, look at all this research I did. But I think that endears me more to his work, especially as time goes on, because it's this guy has done his research. He cares about writing a story. He's not willing to just half-ass it, which many other writers might do. This definitely has earned a spot on my list for this year. Number 5 on the list is The Logger Queen of Minnesota by J. Ryan Straddle. Pretty solid story about growing up in the Midwest, and very much about brewing culture in the Midwest, and like the relationship between two sisters who choose different paths in life. One a more humble path, while other very much focusing on brewing and making money and things like that. A very solid read, very much down to earth, as compared to like Congo or like Pride and Prejudice or something like that. And for me, growing up in the Midwest, I could definitely see, not myself, but I can see the world where this story exists. So a lot of fun to read, and much like how Michael Crichton gets very in depth in his stories, this story was also similarly in depth with like brewing culture, because you very much got into that world, and it allowed you to sort of see these characters as alive in this world that Straddle was creating as alive. So a solid read there. Number 6 on my list is possibly the best book that I read this year. A big contender for that. Like all of these books are good, but one of them is most likely the best book that I read this year, and that is Olga Dies Dreaming by Xochitl Gonzalez, a story about Puerto Rican American woman in the wedding planning industry who watches as Puerto Rico gets torn apart by hurricanes, and the people in power do nothing. And it provides an avenue to talk about colonialism, especially in the present day, and the act of trying to do revolution, as well as like the relationship to your parents, because they're like the main character's mother is very much interested in being a revolutionary, more so than she is interested in being a mother, and that's created a lot of strife there. And so it's kind of affected how the character thinks about Puerto Rico and whether or not it should try to seek its independence and things like that. I thought it was a really amazing book, very emotional, very powerful, a lot to kind of focus on there. And, even like, given its time setting of like, it was set in like 2017, 2018 during the first Trump administration, and now we're in the second Trump administration where things are even worse. So you can see a stronger need for various groups to fight off the oppression and try to seek their independence, to strive for a better tomorrow before these colonialists come in and these capitalists come in and seek to infuse like disaster capitalism as well as other types of very negative capitalism, and robbing a world of its beauty and other things like that. But it's like really well written too. Like you have all of that there, and then you have the writing, which knocked me back. So there was a lot to really grab onto with this story, and I think that's probably why it's the best book, but it's very clear why this book is probably on this list in general. Number 7 on this list is Parable of the Talents by Octavia Butler. I think it's pretty interesting to have this book on this list because I will admit this is not as good as Parable of the Sower. It is the second best book in this series, of which there's only 2 books, unfortunately. But I think because of the power of Butler's writing mixed with what exactly she's saying, it provides you with a lot to think about and a lot to kind of enjoy as you're reading, and a lot to also worry about. Because what's very interesting about the story is it focuses on Lauren Olamina as she tries to build her Earthseed community and really spread her philosophy. But unfortunately, a president who says he's going to make America great again is elected and immediately gives power to those who want to make the oppressed in America feel worse. Like you see a bunch of people deputized to kidnap others who are not living according to true American principles, which feels extremely relevant to what's happening in 2025 with the Trump administration. She said, "Make America great again," and I'm sure that's based off of, Ronald Reagan. Like, it's not that much of a jump. Science fiction just predicts what's going on in the present, and she was writing this, in the early 2000s. It's not that much of a stretch to say somebody would come along like that. But to be able to say there's people getting kidnapped off the streets, that feels that was kind of happening at the time too, but it's happening even more now in 2025, where people who are even Americans get thrown away into ICE detention camps for who knows how long, and who are being sent to prisons in countries where they do not belong, without due justice. And that's a lot of what the story is about. But it's also interesting because this story is told from the perspective of the daughter who was kidnapped from Lauren Olamina, her daughter, who years later is kind of analyzing what her mom was talking about. And there's a lot of criticism there, like, I didn't really know this woman, people like her and whatnot, but she seemed like an enigma to me, so we could never really feel connected. And then also criticizing her mom's choice to focus so much on leaving the planet, but also at the same time kind of understanding why she would want to do that, because if you get humanity to the point where it can leave and go to the stars, you probably built humanity up a pretty solid amount. Like, there are people like Elon Musk and whatnot who say they can go to Mars and whatnot, but unless you make humanity better first, you're really not getting the best minds possible on this thing. You're getting maybe the whitest minds possible, or the richest minds possible, which is not the best. There's a lot of dumb rich people, a lot of dumb white people, which is probably a racist thing to say, but who cares? There's a lot of dumb privileged people out there who claim that they're the smartest, but they're actually not the smartest. So again, like, if you provide a better life for everyone, that allows the truly smartest to rise to the top and help you make it to your end goal. It's really just fascinating to see, the first story being told from Lauren's perspective and the second one being told from her daughter's perspective, and seeing how radically different those are, but the same ideas are kind of being spread there. And I really wish Octavia Butler had finished the third story, or at least some more stories in the saga before she had died, but unfortunately she could never really get to that point. She suffered from a little bit of writer's block, but that doesn't mean that this story is necessarily bad or anything like that. It just means I want more from Octavia Butler. She was an amazing writer, and this story is definitely worthy of being on the top 10 list. The eighth story on my list is Amigo Brothers by Piri Thomas. This is a short story. It's about two brothers who grow up to be boxers, and they are put in a tournament against one another to determine who will eventually get a shot at a world championship of some kind. And there's a lot of discussion of family, of upbringing in certain parts of New York City, as well as the desire to see each other as competitors, and not go easy on each other. And what you end up with is a pretty solid short story that also is one of the better sports short stories that I've read. A lot of the time it's really difficult to write like fighting, boxing, those sorts of things into fiction, because fighting is dynamic and very strange, and I don't think it lends itself to like written format as much as maybe movie or TV or something like that. But Piri Thomas does a really good job, and I especially like how brutal the fight gets, to the point where the audience is shocked. Like, they showed up to a fight and they're witnessing a real fight there, by two people who are brothers. Like, imagine what they might do to other people. So it's a really solid short story. Definitely touched my heart, and that's why it's on the list here. I also read Kira Kira by Cynthia Katahata, one of the final books that I read during this year. It's young adult fiction about two Japanese American girls growing up in the rural South. It has a lot to say about class, about prejudice in the South, and about siblinghood. I loved the sisterly relationship between the two girls, and the emotional stuff that happens throughout the story. I thought it was pretty well done. I won't spoil it here, but I do recommend that you go out and seek it out. And again, this is like one of the Newbery honorees or winners that I talked about, that I frequently talk about on this channel, and it definitely deserves any of the accolades that were tossed at it. And I hope to read more of Cynthia Katahata's work in the future as a result. Now, the last book on this list, the 10th book on this list, was actually somewhat of a challenge to put on the list, especially because I felt like it was either between this or Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. And ultimately I ended up choosing this one, and that is Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. party. And I feel like this book is on the list because of the sort of feminist nature of the book. Even though it was written by a man who had problematic relationships with women to say the least, I do think that I do think it's a solid book about, like class and the perils of being a woman in the 1800s, focusing on Tess, who is just trying to help her family make ends meet, but ends up, running afoul of very wealthy men in the one wealthy man in the community, and issues of also purity, like how we challenge women to be pure, but we don't hold the men who treat women badly to account, especially in the 1800s. And that's a problem we see even today. And Tess's desire to endure, but at a certain point, especially at the end of the story, she finds it difficult to endure. And there's a lot that I can talk about, but I won't go into that great of detail. Make sure to watch the video where I talked about it. But I do think it's a pretty solid read. And not to compare it against anything else. Again, Their Eyes Were Watching God was a solid book that I feel like had a lot of the same ideas, because in that book as well, like the main character whose name I'm forgetting, like she's also dealing with troubling men who don't treat her as well as they should. There's a little bit about like class and race there as well, and oppression, especially in the Deep South. Whereas you don't really see too much of that in Tess of the D'Urbervilles, but I feel like Tess of the D'Urbervilles is solid for other reasons. So, I mean, both of those are worth pursuing if you get a chance to read either. But I think Tess of the D'Urbervilles kind of stands out for a number of other reasons. So be sure to check that one out. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the 10 best books that I read in 2025, the 10 dopest reads, as I always put as the title. Definitely solid books. If you take anything away from this video, let it be that, in the given year, these were 10 books that I really enjoyed, that I think are worth checking out, that I think are worth, reading over anything else that I might have talked about on this channel. Although, again, there were a lot of good other books that I talked about that I just didn't include on this list. So if you have anything to say about this list, or you want to recommend something for 2026, let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this channel or these books if they don't already know. Always good to get more people with eyes on here so that we can continue talking about amazing books and whatnot. Also join the Discord. There's a link to it in the description. So if you want to, have further conversations about these types of books or anything else, really, where, everyone there is willing to, talk with you as well and chat. A lot of weird stuff discussed about there, including some things sometimes talked about by Lucas from Strike the Sun MD. So be sure to check that out if you're interested in the Discord. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and 2025 related to travels. There's only a couple days of that year left, so make sure they're good days. Farewell.